I'm joined now by collage artist Jeffrey Meyer. Jeffrey, thank you for being with me. I want you to take me back in time to when you first started creating. Were you always into collage, or how did it start?
I've always drawn since I was a child. And in my 20s I did comics and illustration work, very much into drawing. And at a certain point that went by the wayside. So at the time what illustrators had was something called a reference morgue, files and files full of reference pictures. Pre-internet, if you wanted to know how to draw a 1973 Lincoln Continental, you would take a magazine picture of a Lincoln Continental,
Sure.
put it in a folder and say, cars, Lincoln Continental, or, Mount Everest, or any specific location or object.
Yeah.
So I would have hundreds and hundreds of these files. Most artists at the time did. And since I wasn't drawing, I had to either throw the pictures out or use them for something else. So I decided, oh, maybe I should try collage. So I did that for a few years and it just sort of snowballed.
So what made you decide, okay, I'm gonna just kind of pivot? And then when you did it feel like, oh, okay, great, this is what I was supposed to be doing all along?
There was some dissatisfaction with my drawing, and I would say because of the internet, hand-drawn illustrations kind of went by the wayside for a while, and when I turned to collage, it was also a way of creating art that surprised me when I made it. I never knew what type of image I was going to make. With drawing, it was more a matter of what's in my head, and will I be able to replicate that on the page?
Yeah.
With collage, I was a little more open to discovery. So,
how long did it take you to kind of get into the groove and maybe find your aesthetic, or find what really lit you up when it came to making collages?
I'd say I did it about 5 or 6 years before I was comfortable with it.
Wow.
Again, each picture was different, so some were good, some were bad, but after 5 or 6 years, I really, knew I could sit down and create a piece that I was comfortable with.
So what is your definition of good or bad? What makes you look at a piece and say, yeah, I was...
If it sells.
Okay, so that's really interesting to me, because I read your artist statement, which basically says you either like it or you don't.
Right.
And so what is that fine line?
That's the viewer, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not a fan of creating didactic work or work that says this is what it means.
Yeah.
That's also a difference between drawing and collage. I try to make pictures in collage that are as ambiguous as possible. They may or may not have a meaning for me. And as I said, I may discover the meaning as I make it or after the fact. But I don't think people should feel, viewers, I don't think viewers should feel that they should have to discover a specific meaning. I'd much rather they have a personal response to the work. And that can also change. My interpretation of my own work changes over years. When I go to a museum and I see the same painting 10 years later, it means something else.
Sure,
So.
yeah, just depending on where you are in
Yeah.
life. Walk me through your process. I mean, are you still using old drawings, or have you ventured into new territory?
No, it's pretty similar. It's always been the same, just it's all analog, no computer stuff at all. I sit down with piles and piles of magazines and books. I disassemble them, and I try to put the images in vague categories. Perhaps landscapes in this pile, backgrounds in this pile. Nothing too strict, because I don't want to limit myself to.
Yeah.
And then I'll just page through them over and over until I see an image that catches my eye, and then I'll isolate that image, and then I'll sort through all the other images and see, does it go together? Does it feel right with this image? And sometimes it'll take 5 minutes, and sometimes it'll take years and years. I've had pieces where I'll literally have 2 components, and I'll put it in a folder, and I'll come back to it years later and open up another image and say, oh, that makes sense now. So
That's fascinating that you can go back and say, okay, yes, this fits. So back to the process, when you're cutting out images, are you using scissors? Are you using an X-Acto knife? I mean,
scissors.
Yeah.
For straight lines, I'll use an X-Acto knife. I do tear occasionally, but it's almost always scissors.
Yeah. And then is it like, glue stick
Yep.
and
Yeah, just a simple-
onto a canvas, or how does that work?
I usually find a background image, whether it's a landscape or a color, a blank color. And then I start with one or two images, and I may glue them on the background, and then later on I may find a better background, so I'll cut them out again. I'll cut them in half and add another image. So they're never really finished until I'm sort of abandoned.
Is there a certain type of publication that you really gravitate toward?
Yeah, heavily image-based magazines, which don't really exist anymore, but from about the 40s through about the 90s, we had magazines like Life and National Geographic, and although I try to avoid those because so many collage artists use those magazines, so I would go on eBay and buy complete runs of, like, Playboy or any magazine that's image heavy, and it's usually the advertising, not the editorial stuff.
Right.
So like Life magazine they'll have good pictures, but for some reason the advertising is a little more interesting to me. I especially like technical manuals. The images in that sort of thing they're not designed as art, so they're a little more functional, and then I try to make them aesthetically pleasing.
What is the best part of making collages? Is there a part of the process? Is it the finished product?
Besides selling one? I like the surprise because, most artists are taught a discipline,
Sure.
which is important, and I think a lot of artists don't use enough discipline. But coming from drawing to collage, it's just about as opposite as you can get in terms of expectation and discovery and the final results, yeah.
Do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt when a piece is done?
Sometimes. Usually the simpler they are, it's easier to determine that they're finished. And I actually prefer the simpler images if they're still somehow compelling and beguiling. That would be my standard, the point at which I would say, okay, I don't want to mess with this anymore because I'll screw it up. Yeah.
So is that your high watermark? You want it to be beguiling?
Yeah, that's for all art, including work that I like to look at, whether it's a film or a book, there has to be a mystery there. Not a mystery in the sense of who did it, like a Agatha Christie or something, but I think of like Stanley Kubrick or somebody like that whose films are you're not sure what his point of view is, and it may be multiple point of views at the same time. My work isn't that complex, it's just one image, but I like to have that mystery, yeah.
Do you ever hide things in your collages?
Good question. I try to have multiple images at once sometimes. The surrealists did that a lot in their work. You might see something on the surface and then you look at it a second time and you'll see, oh, it's several images at once. I like that. I actually like to make work that has no evidence of my hand at all.
How do you mean?
Well, when you think of a painting, there are painters who you can see the brush strokes.
Sure.
And some paintings where it's not photographic, but they hide the brush strokes.
Yeah.
Same with collage. When you're a child and you make a collage, you tend to tear the images and you can see that it's torn. I try to make stuff where it looks like a cohesive image and you're not even sure it's a collage to begin with, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does, because as I was looking
Yeah.
at some of your work, that's exactly what I thought. I was like, wait, is it a
Right.
photo?
And I don't use computers, and I've been accused of using computers. It's not that I want a slick image or a professional-looking image. I want sort of that ambiguity where, how did this image get created? That's part of what I alluded to earlier when I said I might wait years to find two images that go together.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's harmony, but it's a matter of cohesiveness,
Yeah.
right? A lot of collage artists take the first two images they find, slap them together and say, that's good, and that can be good. But I like to hide not my method, but
Your footprint.
yeah, exactly.
So, what has art taught you about yourself?
That's a good question. I've never thought of it. I suppose I'm trying to learn something. I've been doing it for so long and so much.
But maybe not. Maybe it is
not,
just,
yeah.
an outlet and
Maybe it's just a sensory response to the world around me.
Yeah.
I think at one point in an interview I said to someone that I'm just trying to remake images that I'm dissatisfied with in a way that pleases me. you know.
Yeah.
So like advertising and technical manuals or whatever I'm using as a source imagery, I try to change them to have a different meaning. But they still carry that meaning over.
Yeah.
So to me it's interesting that there's multiple meanings.
Well, and how cool that you don't do it using technology. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't go into Photoshop and
Right.
manipulate an ad to make it pleasing to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm not good with technology.
Nor am I. So I especially appreciate your
Yeah.
work. Well, Jeffrey, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Please keep creating.
Thank you.
Continue with your discipline and keep putting art into the world.
Thank you.
For more information, visit jffrymyr.com.
Arts in Focus on PBS Fort Wayne is funded in part by the Community Foundation of Greater Fort Wayne,